be again with you in this new meeting of the Climate Ambition to Accountability project. It's a beautiful title, even if it's a little bit long, but it's indeed one of the 5 climate change grants that my colleague Lydia is implementing. And the overall interest from our side, the EU, is really to support the work of South African stakeholders in engaging actively into the climate action they want to see happening in South Africa, because you would all choose this key climate action in light of your national challenges and national priorities. In my opening remarks, I just want to mention to you, just from the point of your sharing experience, how it's evolving in Europe under the European Green Deal. We also have a very close connection with our citizens and with particularly our climate youth, who are extremely active at holding the EU accountable to the climate goals we have chosen for ourselves and to the trajectory to becoming a climate neutral continent by 2050, net zero climate neutral. So they formally interact with our ministers, they send proposals, and down to the level of their cities, our European citizens, our climate youth, our CSOs, call on us, our trade unions as well, call on us to implement faster or deeper or differently some of our policy instruments. And it's a very useful feedback loop because it helps us actually accelerate the response, and this is required indeed in light of science. But importantly, we also want to learn from our international partners, because we perfectly know climate action can only happen if we are all active globally. So we are looking very closely how also South African stakeholders are feeding in ideas in terms of just transition, in terms of climate action at the local level up to the national level. And again, I want to emphasize that aspect of the local level. We tend maybe to think that climate policy can be set only through national legislation. There's tremendous work that municipalities, that provinces, that different groupings of businesses and citizens can achieve. And we really need to mobilize all the good forces. So I look forward to your ideas today. And if you have any questions on how it's happening in Europe, I'm also happy to answer. Thank you.
Hi, thanks Ariane for that intervention. Maybe can I just ask you, Ariane, to switch on your camera? I think we should be able to switch on the cameras now. Good to see you, Ariane. Sorry for these technological glitches, but I'm glad that we resolve these issues in less than 10 minutes these days. But good to see you, Ariane. Thanks for your support. And yeah, I hope the series and the project meets your expectations. Thank you. Colleagues, before we start the webinar, I would like to invite the attendees to sign up for the project, the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project's newsletter to keep abreast of our activities. The link will be shared with you in the chat by my colleagues. Thanks, Patu and Kingiwe. So as we go, maybe just a couple of words from my side. We are receiving latest stream of scientific information from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on the state of our climate through its 6th assessment report. The 2 reports released so far, that is the Working Group 1 on the science of climate change, and Working Group 2 on the impacts of climate change, are unequivocal, are very clear that the human influence on climate change is unequivocal, unprecedented, and irreversible, that any further delay in concerted global action will miss the brief, rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. As in short, we are essentially running out of time. This implies that we can't just keep on talking and wishing that climate change will be over. We need to go beyond the promises, hence the title. However, the promises are inadequate. but still we need to go beyond promises to the implementation and climate action in a just and inclusive manner. This will bring challenges of transparency, public participation, oversight, and most importantly, accountability. Who is responsible for delivering timeless climate action, and how do we hold them to account? Today, we are initiating a series of webinars which will unpack intertwined questions of implementation and accountability on climate action from various perspectives. As we start this journey, we are joined today by 3 panelists who will bring different perspective on today's theme of beyond the promises. The first speaker is, so I'm going to briefly introduce the panelists and then put questions to them to get their perspective. The first panelist is Melisizwe Fourie, who is an environmental lawyer and the executive director of the Center for Environmental Rights, a non-profit organization of activist lawyers who work with communities and civil society organizations in South Africa to realize our constitutional right to a healthy environment by advocating and litigating for environmental justice. Melissa is also one of the managers of the Life After Coal campaign, which is a joint campaign by EarthLife Africa Johannesburg, Groundwork, and CER itself. And hopefully through this project, we can initiate more of these collaborations in due course of time. In 2020, just to say that this is not a collaboration which was initiated by the project, but that is a motivation for us. In 2020, Melissa was appointed to the Presidential Climate Change Commission. Mduduzi Tshabalala is born and bred in Sebokeng, south of Gauteng province in South Africa. Mduduzi is a founding member of Bothle Thlaho environmental group, doing horticulture and permaculture practice. Mduduzi is also leading member of Extinction Rebellion Val campaign for environmental justice. And Melisizwe Tyiso is a labor market researcher at the National Labor and Economic Development Institute, NALEDI. He has over a decade of experience on various labor topics, but has been primarily focused on climate change and the just transition capacity building for trade unions in the last 8 years. He also coordinated the COSATU and NALEDI Climate Change Reference Group, which brings together labor, academia, and civil society to assist the labor movement on issues related to climate change policies and just transition. Thank you, all 3 of you, for accepting our invitations. I'm going to start with the first question. Maybe we can start by Melissa, then Mduduzi and Melisizwe, reflecting on this question for all of you. Melissa, would you start by reflecting on the climate commitments made since Paris Agreement of 2015 and situated in the South African context from your perspective? Do you think the current policies reflect the views of the do you think they reflect the views of the science, and is it in line with the urgency needed to address climate change? Melissa? Melissa, you're on mute.
There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry, somebody needed to unmute me. Thanks, Prabhat, and hi everybody. Good to be here. Nice to see lots of familiar faces. Yes, so Prabhat, if you, in order to answer your question, maybe I can just explain a little bit about the commission, and because that's the capacity in which I was invited here. I hope that's okay, and the role of the commission in setting these targets, which has been a very interesting journey. So I don't know how familiar people are here on the call about the institution that is the Presidential Climate Commission, but it's essentially a multi-stakeholder body that was appointed to advise the president and government on South Africa's climate change response and to build a social consensus around the just transition. The commission is intended to become a statutory body. It is not yet. There's currently a bill in Parliament called the Climate Change Bill, and that will set some rules and guidelines for and rights and obligations around this commission. I represent the whole range of commissioners on this commission from different sectors, and I represent civil society. We have some of the big emitters on that commission. And we also have government ministers who participate in that commission, and labor, of course. So the setting of the targets. I mean, I just want to tell you that story because I think it's an interesting reflection on using these multi-stakeholder tools to kind of promote climate ambition. and setting targets. And it's going to be very important going forward. So one of the first things that the sort of fledgling Climate Commission did in 2021, we only were appointed in the end of 2020, is to do work around the update of South Africa's nationally determined contribution. So in March 2021, you will remember the Minister of Environment published a draft NDC update, and there was a particular range, 398 to 440 megaton CO2 equivalent in that draft. There was public consultation around that process, and a lot of people agreed that, argued in those consultations that South Africa could not only afford to, but must, for other reasons, adopt a more ambitious NDC. And with a view to making recommendations on this range that would be approved by Cabinet and taken to Glasgow last year, the Climate Commission then invited various expert modeling teams, a range of them, not just one, a range of them, to present technical evidence on the possibilities, the implications of these emissions target ranges. And the Commission then released a recommendation that proposed range be reduced to 350 to 420 megaton CO2 equivalent, as many people here will know. And I should immediately note that, for us as civil society commissioners on that commission, while we welcomed the reduction, obviously, we did not all endorse this revised range. Three of us, myself, Commissioner Bobby Peake, Makhomale Kalakala, wrote to the Commission to record that while that range represented what we called an aggregate view within the Commission, and having regard on who is on the Commission, and that we supported the submission of this recommendation to the President, we did not regard anything above 350 megaton CO2 equivalent as in line with South Africa's fair share on a 1.5 trajectory. So, and we made it clear that our organizations would continue to challenge this outside of the Commission. And that letter is in the public domain. And it's, to some people, this sounded obstructive. Maybe to some of you here, it might sound like capitulation. But I think I share this with you as a reflection on the complexities of using this mechanism to promote climate ambition. And so that was then, of course, ultimately that recommendation was adopted by Cabinet, and that lower bound was then used to garner interest around the climate finance deal at COP26 in November, which is currently known as the Just Energy Transition Partnership between the South African government and other governments. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a sort of a long way for about of answering your question, but just to explain why, so yes, no, we didn't think it was good enough. And I should also say that we should leave the options open for those to be challenged in future. I can maybe speak a little bit later, a little bit more about climate litigation, and the potential of that in South Africa, but just to give you a sense of how that played out in the Commission, and yeah, going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. And I'm sure balancing these two roles, it can be complicated. So thank you for that reflection. I think it's much needed. Because we are trying to get all this in public, domain. So it's also important to understand the complexities in terms of policy making. Maybe I can come to Mduduzi. Mduduzi, would you reflect from community's perspective on whether the current policies are in line with the urgency needed to address climate change?
Thank you, Prabhat. Yeah. So I think in the opinion of community perspective, coming from the Vaal, I'm based in the Vaal, where we see the opposite in terms of policy change, especially on a practical base, because remember in the Vaal we have mostly coal-based industries, and one of the biggest steel makers and petrochemical. It's a mix of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, mixed of greenhouse gases that we get daily. Incidents get reported almost every week or every month from Sasolburg in Bophelong and Sharpeville and Bophelong. Sebokeng, where I am. So we hardly see progress, in my honest opinion. And for instance, I'm one of the activists in the environmental justice who's been crying foul about the recent. I know and I do understand that it has been a pandemic. We are recently undergoing a pandemic, and mostly the power of civil society has been dismantled and taken away from platforms of authorities and decision making. For instance, we've had the forums which are no longer happening now. We see them online. And now most people from communities, when again talking about these incidents that are happening on the ground, like people who are living next to bigger firms like Sasol or ArcelorMittal or any other bigger firm we have here, people who are directly affected are now no longer having a direct channel where they can raise such concerns. So in a community perspective, in my opinion, I think the community is losing so many things. We're losing so many things, none to mention the list, because it would be endless, and somehow it would be like we are not looking, we are overlooking others over other matters, because this impact is quite broad, and somehow I think many people have lost faith and have lost the actual direct consciousness of what is happening. So yeah, it is quite frustrating from an activist community point of view, and because the difficulties faced by the struggle itself, having to represent people whom hardly even fall for the struggle or deeply understand the struggle, because we are deeply divided as a people. That's the perspective I wanted to say. So we are deeply divided, and systematically so. People are divided, none to have a just cause that will bring change. For instance, the policy itself, it is hard to reach out to the success of a policy that will mean a just transition for everyone, the workers, the employers, and the people who are living in the host communities of these bigger industries. So yeah, I think I will end there.
Thanks, Mduduzi. I think it's also interesting because Melissa brought, like, from a legal perspective, that what ought to be and what you're bringing is what is. And I think the challenge is to bridge that gap, like, how the normative assumption and what's actually on the ground. So thanks for that perspective. Melisizwe, could you reflect from labor perspective on the current policies in place and whether they are in line with the urgency needed to address climate change? Melisizwe? I see Melisizwe is with us. Pato, could you check if Melisizwe, you're on mute. Hi, Melisizwe. Can you hear us? And maybe I should just mention to the speakers to stay unmuted, because I think Zoom asks us to unmute again and again. Melisizwe, we can't hear you yet. Hi, Melisizwe. Can you try once more? Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Excellent. I'm not sure what's going on there. It just keeps showing me the host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves for some reason. But I'm glad that you can hear me. So Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Melisizwe Tyiso. I work for the National Labour and Economic Development Institute in NALEDI, which does primarily capacity building and research work for the labor movement or trade unions. So I think, for me, the starting point is that we need to always remember that South Africa is still a developing country. We often, in a lot of cases, I think we, as a country, we punch above our weight and we measure ourselves against developed countries. And this, I think, is one of the biggest problems. We often hear critics saying that South Africa's is very ambitious in terms of its international commitments. Sorry, in terms of its international commitments, considering the challenges that we face of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And I'll focus quite a bit on these challenges that we face as a country and why I say, I agree that in a lot of cases, in a lot of instances, we are punching above our weight and we forget that we are still a developing country. So I think, one of the there are certain targets that are set, for example, in the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. But one of South Africa's biggest challenges is that we write policies and make commitments that are excellent on paper, but when it comes to the implementation, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, we are currently faced, as I said, I'll largely focus on the triple challenges that we always refer to in South Africa. So we have this issue of unemployment. Unemployment is sitting at 46%. We're approaching 50% soon. Last week, or was it 2 weeks back, the World Bank, whose austerity measures we keep following, they released a report saying South Africa is still the most unequal country in the world. Poverty is on the rise and it was exacerbated by COVID. So, for me, one of the things that's starting to come out or emerge quite a lot, and not just for myself, but for the trade unions, is that some of these commitments are a bit too ambitious for us as a country, as where we currently sit. Because, okay, so Mduduzi earlier just mentioned that we are deeply divided. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we face, is that we are deeply divided as communities, as workers. We often, when you go internationally, people admire our constitution and the fact that we have the multi-stakeholder dialogues that we have in the country. But a lot of people are quite frustrated with these multi-stakeholder dialogues that we have. I know a lot of people have been frustrated, for example, just with the NALEDI process. It's an example all around the world, but it's a big, a lot of people still have a challenge with the transparency, the lack of transparency and so forth. So I think, we are very, we are very ambitious. 2030, which is one of the targets that is set in the NDCs, as well as in the, the IRP, the 2019 IRP, to reduce, for example, the dependence on coal. How many mine closure certificates have been awarded in the past 10 years? We keep seeing rising unemployment, and it's so bad that those mines that are shutting down, the zamazamas, we now have this this phenomenon of zamazamas, people who don't care that it's dangerous to go down these mine to go down these mine shafts with no safety equipment, but they are willing to go and risk their lives every single day and spend weeks or months on end underground trying to earn what little that they can get underground because people are just desperate. I recently met some mine workers in Mpumalanga who were saying, and I'm sure people are familiar with the closure of Optimum Mine around Hendrina. And they were saying that they lost their jobs in 2018, and it's just been poverty and struggle for them since 2018. And yes, they admit they have health issues, they have health problems, but they would go back underground any day. As soon as that mine would be open, they would go back underground and go work because they need to put food on their table. So, you know, this is, I love that we are very ambitious, but when it comes to the practicality, the practical examples are unfortunately not there. There's no rehabilitation of land happening. There is, as I mentioned earlier, there's no mine closure certificates that are being given out. Unemployment is on the rise. There's a lack of intergovernmental coordination. This is a big, big challenge, is that you find one department saying this, another department saying that. So that's another huge problem. We have a health system that is collapsing. The education system is collapsing. But, you know, having said all of this, I don't want you to all think that the labor movement is resistant to change. I mean, the labor movement have been calling for a just transition. We started to call for a just transition in 2011 already. Before it was even promulgated or included in the text of the 2015, what do you call this thing? The Paris Agreement. And now it's become a fad. Everyone just transition, but what do we mean by just transition? You know, this is one of the contested areas again. What do we mean by just transition? Is it a transition that's going to serve the working class? I mean, you know, Mduduzi quite rightly says that we hardly see any progress, especially in the communities. We hardly see any progress. So I really do think that, I mean, we are punching above our weight as a country, and especially without a clear plan. I don't see us meeting our 2030 targets. And I understand that, you know, I know for the civil society would like to see a much greater ambition. We'd definitely like to see, even in the labor movement, would like to see much greater ambition coming from the South African government. But again, implementation has been such that it leaves a lot to be desired. So, yeah, I'm sorry to sound pessimistic, but I think we need to fix some of the bread and butter issues that we face as a country. Because this is one of the challenges. People will often tell you that climate change, just transition. I need to put bread on the table today. And the jobs that we are talking about are imaginary jobs. They are still forthcoming attractions. What if they don't come? So we need to be speaking or having examples, practical examples, so that people can see and grow the green economy. Instead of just having the talk shops, people need to start seeing the potential, seeing it live, seeing that potential live instead of on paper. I don't know how much time I could go on for.
Thanks. Maybe if I can just ask, we have been on many calls and I can recognize your voice from a mile away, but I've never seen you on the video. So if it's possible for you to switch on the videos, and I would also just request Mduduzi to please switch on the video. Thanks, Sizwe. What I pick from this discussion or your opening statements are, if I were to summarize it, I will pick I'm very ambitious from Sizwe's intervention, divided from Mduduzi, and not so ambitious from Melissa. And I think that that captures, like, you know, that division, that ambition, that not so ambition. But I think in Sizwe, your intervention, you did highlight that we are still caught up in environment versus development debate. And I think that the challenge is how do we overcome that binary choice that we are often faced with. So maybe I can start the next question with you, and then Melissa and Mduduzi can weigh in. Speak about what is needed to realize climate action beyond what is being promised, and why do we need to prioritize accountability? Sizwe?
Thanks, Prabhat. So I think first and foremost, that word, the last word that you mentioned, accountability, is quite central to be able to achieve a lot of the policies and targets that we set ourselves as a country. Is if we can have accountability, that would be a fantastic start. And then coordinated governmental, a well-coordinated government where that speaks with one voice, not one department saying this, another saying that, another one implementing this, another one implementing something totally different. So if we could start with that, and then the big C, corruption. I mean, that's one of the biggest, and I guess maybe it goes along with accountability, but that's often one of the biggest, for me, these are if we could end that, if we could address those challenges, then I think we could start achieving some of the targets that we set ourselves as a country. Is if we can improve our accountability and have proper coordination amongst national government as well as local government, because local government are the implementers. But local government are often the scapegoats, because they are closest to the communities, but they are incapacitated themselves. There's a lack of coordinating of capacity for local government itself. So if we could have proper coordination amongst government departments, I think that for me would be a fantastic start towards achieving some of the targets and goals that we set ourselves as a country. And not just the climate goals, but the goals that we set in general as a country. Yeah.
Thanks, Sizwe. Melissa? Pato, you may have to help Melissa to unmute her.
There we go.
And if I can just request Sizwe and Mduduzi to stay unmuted and on video, because Zoom again puts you in default unmute. Melissa?
You have very restrictive Zoom privileges here at WWF.
We're only discovering it today, frankly.
Yeah, look, lots of big issues. I mean, and I agree with a lot of what Tshizo's just said, but let me just start by reflecting on some of Mdu's comments. I mean, I think, and that's why, that's why having a diverse panel is such an important thing, when you have these discussions coming from very different perspectives and seeing this problem from different angles. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, there's this massive gulf, this discrepancy between having like fancy national policy discussions and what's actually happening on the ground in this country. We've got a situation where climate impacts are being felt already across the country. We can see that in the drought, we see it in the heat waves, the impacts on agriculture, it's already happening and people are feeling it on the ground. We've got, this really egregious relationships between communities and corporations and industrial operations. And Mdu can talk about this for a long time in the context that he lives in there. We can also see in the last week or so, we've been doing these public engagements. Sizwe has also been to some of them as the commission, speaking to people. And if you hear the absolute anger and frustration that people express of their relationships with mining companies and other industrial operations and how they are treated by those companies, it's a huge problem. And I think from corporate South Africa's point of view, This is a huge challenge that they're going to have to overcome, and it's part of the climate issue, right? So you've got that aspect, and you've got ongoing violations in air pollution. And like, we've done lots of work on air pollution and the impact that has on people's like health and development prospects. I mean, it's really egregious human rights violations. And then we've got this like existing, this hand that we've been dealt, which is like this terrible, let me rephrase that. It's not actually a hand that's been dealt. let me first say what it is. This incredible ongoing existing injustice of poverty and inequality we have in our country. I mean, that's not something that happened by accident. It's a deliberate outcome of ongoing government and corporations action over many, many years, right? And I mean governments from way back. So this really leads to this issue of kind of what that transition is going to have to look like. Because it cannot just be about energy transition. It has to be a kind of societal transformation that really looks at those issues, those fundamental injustices and the inequities of kind of racism and sexism, systemic racism and sexism that's built into into our systems in this country, and to some degree in the world, right? So having said all of that, I do have to push back a little bit against this idea of ambition. There's this sort of ambition makes it sound a little bit like it's a nice to have, and we should do better, and it's not actually what we're talking about here. We're actually talking about necessity. The climate science is crystal clear about this stuff and the actions that we need to take. So it's not really a question of thinking we should delay this a bit because things are already so bad. We don't have those options. They are not available to us. And for us who are in any sort of spheres of influence and power, we have to use that to protect the people who live in this country from the impacts of what's happening to them. And we've got to prepare the country, we've got to prepare our systems, our infrastructure, all of that stuff, because the problem is what I was going to say about the hand that we dealt. We can't stop now to try to fix these problems before we deal with the impacts of climate change. We don't have that luxury. So in one way or another, we're going to have to use this opportunity where things are shifting fast, and that the pace of the transition is also largely outside of our control. This is happening globally to us, and to some degree, it's really about, can we find the opportunities and particularly in relation to the role of powerful forces like capital, to shift those forces to benefit everybody in the country, and to create a more just and equal society where we have more jobs and we have people who can have different models of ownership and can actually share in the prosperity of this country. So I would sort of just be like cautious about, sort of portraying this as like a choice that we have, and we must do because we're just a developing country, so we can't go so fast. These are not, to a large degree, not options that we have. So it's really about how we can use this opportunity more than anything else. I totally agree with Melisizwe about the need for a plan. I mean, I think that's partly what the Commission is trying to do with its Just Transition Framework. And the coordination issue, couldn't agree more. I mean, that's part of the challenge we have, is this kind of policy dissonance we have, where we've got the president saying climate change is very serious and we must take action, and then we still support fossil fuel heavy projects that by themselves will wipe out any prospect of meeting our NDC. Those kind of things we're going to have to look ahead. And that applies to the big emitters, to labor, to civil society. We're going to have to come together around a vision, right? Which I think is, as hard as that is to achieve in a country, that is as deeply divided as my colleagues have said, to try to at least come to some kind of area of agreement where we can move towards. And I don't want to sound like overly optimistic about it, because I think Melisizwe is absolutely right. We are great at plans and really terrible at implementation. But that's the challenge for us and our generation, is how do we fix this? How do we not make this like the worst thing that's happened to South Africa? How do we make this into an opportunity to make things fairer, to make things safer, particularly for women in our country? How do we use these opportunities rather than like falling behind and then being left to the ravages of the market and the global markets, you know, which is kind of what's happening to people living in Ndrina and Komati and who have already lost their jobs. And it's like shocking and terrible that we don't already have plans in place to support those individuals and their families in those communities. And that's certainly what we as civil society commissioners are fighting for as part of the Climate Commission.
Thanks, Melissa, for that intervention. Mduduzi, can you come in on that question and speak about what is needed to realize climate action that is being promised and to prioritize accountability?
Yes, Prabhat. Thanks for that. Sure, I wouldn't even know where to begin, but yeah, also just to reflect with what other speakers are saying. Melisizwe has said quite a lot, which I wanted to respond to, but yeah, also, you know, what Melissa is saying, because we've been sharing quite a lot of work and sentiment. It's quite true, and in the opinion, what I would say as a suggested solution is honesty and commitment. You know, I mean, above all the challenges, you know, Melisizwe has quite laid them out. He laid them out, and we really need to start talking about our challenges, not just talking about them, but face them directly and be honest about them, and, you know, commit to what we really have to do, because it starts about commitment. Melissa spoke about issues of police, and in the opinion, it was all about industry committing to what was laid out as you know, as policy standards. People didn't commit. People seriously didn't commit. That's what we saw. That's what we keep seeing here in the ground. People are not committed to what is supposed to be there. And we are seriously missing out. And as a solution, we are seriously missing out. Whether it can be zamazamas or formal mining, or people on the ground, even people directly on the ground, we are missing out on what are serious solutions that need to unite us again as a society that needs to adapt to this catastrophe. Because whether we are suspending what needs to happen or not, the catastrophe is happening and we are meeting it. Unfortunately, others are paying with their lives. That is so unfortunate. So it is happening because we are missing out. One thing important to talk about is that being honest is, for instance, ESCOM, now not fantasizing as an ambition, because we have, I'm not sure which is it, is it Kendall, or I'm not sure which of their power station was retrofitted to a CSP. That is a success adaptation method people need to talk about. But hardly we are seeing it on the public domain. People are not talking about that. Unfortunately, the project, it is now again absorbing international aid, and yet we are crying about unemployment. What about the local apprenticeship that is supposed to be absorbed by such project in South Africa? We are not being honest, and we are never committed, and we are going to be so divided as a society in terms of reaching out to what is facing us as a challenge. We have huge, deep challenge, serious challenge that we are seriously not talking about, like soil depletion. Out of all the depletions we are facing, we can talk about water, it's fine. People are not talking about soil depletion, and it is very, very, very sad and scary to learn about such a depletion that we are never going to get to get a chance to grow food in the next coming years. So whether we want something or not, So suspending what needs to happen, it is never going to help us because we are facing this challenge and it is happening right now and it is going to affect us all. So solutions are there. And in my opinion, I think we must do more and do better. We can do better as a society because people need to commit. I think I cannot speak much more than that. I can speak a whole lot of stuff, but those are the emphasis points I can speak about. I think we need to commit ourselves to what are solutions. Solutions are there. We just need to do better and commit ourselves.
Thanks, Mduduzi. Please stay on unmute. I'm coming to you with the next question. But what I picked from this round of discussion was Sizwe emphasizing the need for coordination, both vertical and horizontal. Melissa, in your intervention, referring to policy dissonance, but what reminded me of IPCC's working group one's Code Red for Humanity. And it seems like Code Red for Humanity came and gone and we've forgotten about it. Now it's the working group 2 is there and we are busy fighting wars, right? So we have forgotten that there was a Code Red for Humanity, not only for humans, but humanity in humanity. And then Mduduzi, you mentioned about commitment. I think all are important elements to fix accountability. I think what I missed was the question of capacity, because that sort of undercuts them, that, how are we going to enhance capacity to deliver on the ground, whether it's in terms of commitment or addressing policy dissonance or enhancing coordination. And I guess I saw one of the questions by the audience. So coordination is both, when we're talking of vertical capacity, that includes civil society. And I think that's the Presidential Climate Commission is an example of that vertical capacity or coordination, that you reach out to non-state non-governmental actors. But maybe I'll switch to the next question and I'll come to you, Mduduzi. And you have spoken to that already in terms of commitment. But if you were to take a step forward in terms of realizing that, what are the challenges that you foresee when we go about establishing accountability? What challenges do you foresee? What challenges we will run into and what we should be prepared for? Mduduzi, can you unmute yourself? Or maybe Melissa, can I come? Yeah, Mduduzi, please go ahead.
Yes. Yes, I think the challenge is that we do have a capacity at, it is there. Perhaps it may not be recognized. It is there. It may be suppressed in the opinion. And for instance, we are not going to get the much better required or desired experience if we are not recognizing small capacities as it happens, because we do have small successful projects or events that we can talk about. But as much as the such success is not recognized and such not to be enhanced, that's where we are losing this, because we need to recognize small progress where it is happening and then give it much more support.
Thanks. Melissa, do you want? Sorry, Mduduzi, are you done? Okay. Melissa?
Yes. Look, absolutely, capacity is a huge issue for us. I mean, we have had now many years of our state institutions being kind of hollowed out, and crucial state institutions. And also we have local government. I think Tyiso spoke about the role of local government, which is absolutely crucial when it comes to climate change. And that's probably where some of our greatest weaknesses are. So this is a massive challenge for us as a country, and, I should also say that, I know many South Africans and people living in this country are pessimistic about this and sort of despairing about this and the decay and stuff they see around them. But I do also think that South Africa is a country of great potential. There was that advertisement, the campaign of South African tourism a few years ago that talked about South Africa being alive with possibility, and I couldn't agree more. It really is a country with incredible potential and incredible people and such amazing social capital. And so, as much as we've been through, we've also achieved incredible things in the past, and we know that it's possible to do that. There's so many amazing initiatives happening at a local level. Mduduzi's organization being an example of that, of people who can kind of pull stuff together on the ground. If I think what happened here, I live in Cape Town. What happened here amongst community action networks that were kind of set up and revived ahead of the day zero crisis, and also during COVID in the lockdown. This is what we have. We have this incredible potential. So look, there are some kind of obviously institutional kind of interventions here, and you see some of that stuff coming through the Climate Commission. And maybe I should just sort of touch briefly on what that's going to look like. I see there's a question in the chat about kind of how that's going to work, And so very important that there's at the moment a climate change bill in Parliament, right? I understand from my colleague Brandon that there's going to be an actual session on the climate change bill as part of this series in a short while. And just really encourage people to participate in that. And the reason, there are lots of important things in the climate change bill, which is also about just transition. And it's really going to set the framework for all this work that we're going to do, right? The Climate Commission itself, which, in true South African fashion, is a unique institution, right? It's not straightforward. We've got some of the biggest enemies around these issues sitting on the same commission. And so, so the Commission's going to be critical in this process going forward. So currently that bill gives the Commission quite a bit of influence over climate action. It must advise government on climate change response, on mitigation, on adaptation, and also monitoring and evaluation of progress towards government's goals, right? And so that process and what happens in Parliament over the next year is going to be really important. There are sort of broader kind of, in addition to the capacity and the governance issues, and you'll see that if you look at the Just Transition Framework, there's a draft floating around at the moment that's come out of the Commission. It's open for comment, and there's a specific part of that deals with governance, and some of these capacity issues that we've been talking about. So please encourage everybody to go and participate and make comments and add and share brilliant ideas. But specifically from the Commission's point of view, supporting science-based research, and I use science also in the broad sense of also looking at traditional science. You'll see that the Commission's own documents refer to that, to inform policy making and economic decision making, and really building that scientific research capability and resources, which is going to be super crucial in the climate action and adaptation response. Obviously making recommendations in relation to policy issues based on that science. And it's worth asking questions here about what the role of the Commission and other institutions will be in setting of those carbon budgets and the targets under the bill, and how this links to the carbon tax, for example, and all of those issues that are proposed as enforcement tools in response to the question being asked in the chat. Then, of course, also tracking the progress on the transition-related policy targets and South Africa's legal obligation around climate action. We're actually supposed to be considering an update of our NDC in this year. And so at what point are we going to revise that again and see what is still appropriate, bearing in mind that our current range, as approved by Cabinet, goes into 420 is on a 2-degree trajectory, which is, as I said right at the outset, we can't do that. We can't have a 2-degree trajectory. And then finally, of course, generally raising awareness and facilitating dialogue around climate action. A lot of this is about and we can see this from the public engagements. People are desperate for information. They want to make decisions about their own lives, their own development prospects. And they want to understand what is happening. They want to have reliable information about climate change, about the proposals for the just transition, new industries that are supposed to come about. You know, and I just, while we on this making this point in conclusion, the you know, I know Sizwe talks about what did he call them? In my mind, I noted it as like pie in the sky. I can't remember the word you used, Sizwe. But I mean, the reality is that there is a lot of potential. We know this from research, and so it is our job to make that happen and to show people, as Sizwe has argued, what that could look like, and give people a real sense of like a vision, a dream, so we can understand what this is going to look like. How our towns and our cities can be transformed as part of this process, to be safer, to be more climate resilient. You know, if I think about the floods that have ruined people's houses and stuff in the Eastern Cape just in this last few months, you know, and those people have to start rebuilding from scratch. There's no help for them, you know. And so just these various ways in which climate change starts to impact us, so that we're able to provide not only support, but lots of information to empower people. I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. So if you can come in on what you see as challenges in establishing accountability, but if I can also push you further, we are sitting on a paradox. We are talking of huge capacity gaps, and yet at the same time we have high unemployment rate, right? That just doesn't make sense. That, you know, they don't have capacity and you have 40-50% of population is unemployed. How do we tap into that, you know, and start seeing that as an opportunity that we really need to bring to the fore in addressing this issue? Sizwe?
Yeah, thanks, the chair. I think, you know, one of the things, and I think it was Mduduzi and Melissa, they talked about the reskilling and the training that needs to happen. I think, you know, in terms of that, that's one of the most vital things, and the awareness raising. It's people are hungry for information. What are the skills that they're going to be needed in the future? What should the TVET colleges and the universities be looking at educating or capacitating our people on, so that when we do finally have action, a movement, people are ready to take up those skills, and we don't have to rely, like Sandile mentioned, that we don't have to rely on foreign labor. So because we're sitting with this huge unemployment rate, so let's start skilling people right now, so that even so when these opportunities do occur, we are there. I mean, I'll make an example of, I mean, there was a wonderful initiative by the, was it DMRE? Yeah, everyone hates DMRE, but there was a wonderful initiative of the solar water geysers. And I think that was brilliant. But if you go around the townships where these solar water geysers were put up, very few are still working. People have resorted to putting up the traditional electric geysers back in their homes, because one of the biggest complaints is that when these things break, because one, we used cheap imports that were bought. So when these things do break, where are the artisans? Where are the Kasi electricians to fix them when they are broken? When people have poverty, they'll look back to the old traditional methods of warming or heating up their water, because they know that, oh, this one is reliable. I can't just find an electrician around here in my neighborhood who has the skills to fix the solar water geyser that's sitting up on my roof. In fact, it's becoming a problem, the solar water geyser, because it's leaking now. and it's leaking on my roof and damaging my house. So you see now a wonderful initiative can just crumble because we didn't put the issue of skills and the training up front. And it's so sad because in the 2011, is it 2011, the Green Accord, skills, maintenance, and manufacturing are one of those things that are put up as primary, as central to achieving or to that project of the solar water geysers, and all partners signed on to it. But we hurried and bought cheap, what you might call it, solar water geysers from China, put them on people's roofs, on RDP houses, but we didn't train people to do the maintenance. So I think, yeah, the reskilling and training is very, very central, and it needs to happen now. It needs to happen as in yesterday. But then again, in terms of accountability, I also hold us as people accountable. We need to hold ourselves accountable as citizens of South Africa. So, I mean, and Melissa mentioned we, as much as we're facing all of the challenges that we're facing as a country, but this gives us an opportunity as South Africans to unite, to challenge government to be more accountable. So, I mean, one of my comrades is always say we need to build these red-green alliances. Comrade Jack, we need to be building these red-green alliances. So if you go back to the apartheid days, for example, when unions called for a stay away, the whole community stayed away. You had support from various members of society. So we need to build these alliances so that when a community of Mpumalanga says there are enough of the pollution in their area, can we shut down in all our provinces? Can we also march in solidarity with those communities? So we as civil society, labor, we need to hold ourselves accountable as well for not being united. We need to build those alliances amongst ourselves so that they can see that people are serious. We want this climate action now. We need movement. We need governments to be held accountable. So when in Mpumalanga, it mustn't just be the people in Mpumalanga of a town of Hendrina are striking alone. They are protesting alone. Let the rest of the country, from Mpumalanga to Cape Town, let's join them. Let's join them in our own spaces to call for this action. Because often what happens is that we have, they say we have divided actions. So up until we stand united, then we are constantly going to be just having talk shops. Climate change remains low on the priority, or just transition remains low on the priority. So we need to start holding ourselves accountable as well, and not just always blame government. Because I think, now we all know the challenges of government. But let's hold ourselves accountable. Let's unite amongst ourselves. And then we need to stop importing the solutions. When Labour in 2018, when there was the announcement that the IRP, was it IRP 3 at the time, 2018, under Minister Jeff Hadebe, announced that there's going to be this round of independent power producers that must come and bid. Labour were first to resist. You know why? Not because we don't want renewable energy. NUM was one of the first unions to call for a just transition, to recognize that coal is a dirty in coal mining is a dirty industry and makes our workers sick. But when we resisted this, we weren't resisting the renewable energy. The resistance was not against renewable, it was against what we could see as privatization of our electricity system. What Sandile referred to as the importing of foreign labor. So again, I go back to reskilling, so that we need to be pushing the skills right now, the training right now, so that when we do see action, it is local artisans that are working in all these various opportunities that are emerging. We talk of, yeah.
Sorry,
okay.
Sizwe.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Sizwe. Thanks for that. I do like the Red Green Alliance, and maybe I can plug that this project is all about. So I should have mentioned the Climate Ambition to Accountability project is a partnership between WWF, South African Climate Action Network, and Institute for Economic Justice. So it's a collaboration of environmental and social civil society organizations. So through this project, we are trying to bring environmental and social organizations and labor together. That is the reason why you see a diversified panel also. I will now get to the questions. So we have 3 questions. Maybe we can start with Melissa. Melissa, there's a question that if you could share a little more on the Just Transition framework, what process drove its development and who was involved in next steps, maybe very briefly, because you already touched on the Presidential Climate Commission.
Sure. I'm still hoping to say something about climate litigation, Prabhat. Don't let me, give me a moment, so later. So the Just Transition Framework is essentially the sort of second major output from the Climate Commission. It started off as, just to tell you who the role players were in that process, there's a steering committee that consists of some commissioners who volunteered for that steering committee, plus various external experts. The main technical experts who worked on the project are the Trade and Industrial Policy. What is the S again?
Strategies,
I can never remember.
Strategies, I think.
Strategies of TIPS, yeah, who's an interesting research institute. Many of you know that basically sort of straddle or actually comes more from the labor and the trade side, and then an industrial policy side, and then increasingly working in the space of climate and just transition. And they started off with a kind of concept paper that basically set out the different kind of conceptual frameworks for the idea of just transition. As many people know, that comes primarily from the labor sector. And so developing that, what does it mean? What does the justice part actually mean in terms of just transition? How would we know if transition was just? Unpacking those sort of concepts. We then entered into a period of policy dialogues out of that. And some of you would have participated in those processes, looking at issues of the core value chain, of governance issues, of water. Somebody help me, remind me what the others were. Anyway, there were sort of a series of about 6 of them, and each was accompanied by a policy brief. And all of those things are on the Commission's website. That then resulted in a synthesis paper. You're still with me? And that synthesis paper then was developed into a draft framework for the just transition, supposedly learning from that entire process that we went through for about 6 months last year. That framework then had a round of comments from the steering committee, and a lot of us gave input, and that draft is now the draft that was published for public comment by the end of March. We are in the process as the Commission, commissioners of engaging with, first of all, on a series of public engagements throughout the country, and there are a list of specifically aimed at meeting affected communities where they are. So both by the transition and by climate. So there's a series of them happening at the moment until sort of the mid-April. There's also a multi-stakeholder conference happening on the 6th of May. But before that, also there are other sectoral engagements going on. So with academia, for example, with other key sort of sectors who are affected by this, to make sure that all ideas, as many as possible, not all, but as many as possible ideas feed into this process. And then after that multi-stakeholder conference, hopefully that can be submitted, finalized and submitted to Cabinet for approval and implementation through the government systems. But I mean, I think none of us are naive enough to think that one document can can solve or even fully guide this process. But the idea is obviously to build kind of consensus around it as much as possible. And then that will have to be reviewed on an ongoing basis, and reflection and amendments as things change. And we live in an incredibly fast changing environment globally and in South Africa.
Sorry, Melissa, I have 5 minutes and 3 questions.
I am at the end. I'm at the end.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so just encouraging people to participate in that process. Thanks.
Thank you. Sizwe, I'll come to you with a question from Brandon on the unemployment challenge. I don't know if you can see it in the question and answers. Okay. It says that restoring ecosystems in order to keep storing and taking more carbon dioxide out of atmosphere could provide job opportunities all around the country, similar with mine rehabilitation. What would it take to direct funding into initiatives like this? Would you like to respond to that, Sizwe? I can post it on the chat for you if that helps. Sorry, Sizwe, yeah.
Yes, I just couldn't unmute there. Excellent question, Brendan. This is one of the questions I've been asking. I think I raised it in the beginning that how many, how many mines have been granted a closure, a successful closure license? And part of those closure licenses would keep workers on to ensure that there's some sort of rehabilitation happening. So I completely agree with Brendan. This is one of the things or the questions that I always, when I engage with people from the DMR, is around the rehabilitation. Exactly around the rehabilitation. It's a potential jogging, and there are funds. Yes, the funds won't be able to cover all of the, I think the last I heard was 6,000 abandoned mines, but you'd have to start somewhere. And I think last week or 2 weeks back, I unfortunately couldn't attend, but DMRE has a closure and rehabilitation strategy that they're going to be implementing. But I think, it's about time. It's about time. So I completely agree with Brendan that these are, I call them the low-hanging fruits in terms of employment creation, restoring of ecosystems, finding alternative uses for the land that's already been mined, or repurposing of a power station. So definitely I agree with Brendan. You sit here, and I think Sandile also asks about that. You look at Gauteng, in Johannesburg, there's a lot of closed gold mines. They're a problem. You go to the Krugersdorp, the Carltonville area, these are a problem. And again, rehabilitating those spaces, finding alternative uses for those spaces is definitely a potential employment creator. So I completely agree with Brendan that these are potential spaces.
Thanks. Mduduzi, would you like to respond to any of the questions very briefly? Mduduzi? Hi. You were unmute, but you've gone mute again. Yes.
Yes. Thanks, Prabhat. No, I will just give added comments because I think other speakers have said what I would have wanted to say. But one thing important, Prabhat, is that we are already doing something called assets-based community-driven and development. And often extended, I add eco-village design and education. I think this is the fundamental basis of what we need to be doing more. We are already doing it. Other communities are doing it in the Eastern Cape, the Western Cape, they are doing it. across South Africa. It may, ABCD may be an imported model from Canada, but people are already doing it across the continent. People have been doing it. It is one of the business knowledge systems that has been existed for quite some time. Perhaps, in my opinion, I think Canada has made it quite a bit more, they took it to be more advanced, perhaps with the kind of urban societies we are becoming, or we have become. Hence, assets based, because people need to take care of their assets already where they are. And one of the best thing of taking care of the ecosystem itself is recognizing all the assets, because an ecosystem is an asset itself. The fauna land, that is an asset sitting at its own. Sometimes it can be in the wilderness, and the laws, again, the laws will prohibit people not to use the assets that can be exposed to, communities that can be disadvantaged in terms of resource, and, building your township economies again. So people can be prohibited, because I remember women in the Western Cape were arrested for harvesting wild garlic, and it grows in the wild everywhere. And this is an asset on its own, So we have people who are having skills, people who could be veterans, people who have professional skills who are sitting in communities. We are not utilizing such assets in our communities. And these are people of best expect advice on how to take care of wastewater works, for instance. To acknowledge that South Africa, this I learned quite a few years ago from the Water Research Commission, that South Africa is one of the best countries in terms of biomonitoring and wastewater care works. We are sitting on top of the best top 5 list countries, but we are not utilizing better such an asset skill in our country. I don't know why. So yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks. I will end this here.
Thanks, Mduduzi. Melissa, thanks for answering 2 questions on the chat. I can give you 2.5 minutes.
To talk about
the litigation.
Oh, exciting. Okay, great.
But just 2 minutes.
It's just, I also just responded to that question in the chat about what civil society is doing. I think there's a very interesting kind of aspect to climate accountability, which involves the use of litigation and the courts to make progress with that, right? And so, obviously some of you will know there's been a huge amount of an increase in climate litigation across the world. Literally thousands of cases that have arisen across the globe. And mostly they've been very effective at shifting and unblocking some of the political constraints within democratic systems of government, with all, vested interest and political party funding. You still see some of that playing out very painfully in the US, for example. But in other countries, we've seen it really like shifting things, including in the UK and in countries in Europe, but also in the South. And we've also seen some climate litigation aimed at emitters directly. Shell in the Netherlands being an example. Just a couple of days ago, Client Earth, who's our sort of counterpart in the UK, have commenced legal proceedings against the board of Shell for the mismanagement of climate risk. So there's some very, very interesting stuff happened. The litigation's becoming more and more diverse and creative. And generally, and I think this is an important thing to note, is that it's finding traction with judges across the world. And so here in South Africa, I've worked for the Center for Environmental Rights, as you said in the beginning, and we have been running various cases. Some of them have been reported judgments by South African judges who have found in favor and said, yes, you must consider climate impact when you plan big developments, right? And there are a whole portfolio of other cases making their ways through the courts at the moment, including challenges of particular projects on climate grounds, including gas projects. And also there's a big cancel coal use case with the African Climate Alliance and other applicants aimed at setting aside the determination of electricity procurement from new coal plants, right? Still to be built. And in future, I think that this may well include this litigation strategy challenging our own climate targets, taking action on adaptation, claims, damages claims for climate damage that's being caused, and that could even happen internationally between countries. Think of a country like Mozambique that suffered enormously as a result of climate change already through flooding. So lots of interesting things happening there. And there's also, many of you will know about the Shell case recently, where we've seen civil society.
Sorry, Melissa, you have to please wrap up. Because we just need to do one intervention after this. Sorry, can you please wrap up to the last?
Yes, I will, Prabhat. There is the coastal communities have challenged the seismic testing and exploration of oil and gas offshore. So there's and that's also where climate arguments are being made. I thought it was important to mention that. I think that's only one of the accountability mechanisms, but it's definitely something that's growing in South Africa and will play a role going forward.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Very important intervention, and I hope the next webinar will touch on that. Thando, can I give the floor to you to briefly touch upon the next webinar and how this one relates to that? And I think that will also touch on what Melissa provided inputs on. Thando? Thando, can you come in?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah, so colleagues, thank you so much for your time and for the wonderful panel discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know some of my other colleagues did as well. I hope you guys did as much as we did. Some very insightful insights there. So just for me, it's just to do a bit of a wrap up and closure and some next steps. This Beyond Promises webinar is the first in a series of about 6 webinars that we're going to do. The next webinar we're going to have is on the 21st of April. We're going to be focusing on the climate change bill specifically. My colleagues have put in the chat a link for you guys to register on that one. And then soon afterwards, we'll be having subsequent webinars that we would like everyone to attend and to pass it along as well to as many colleagues who haven't joined today that is possible. And then we've also got a link to a newsletter that we are producing as the colleagues working on the Climate Ambition to Accountability project. I think another link should be popped in there. And then we'll just follow up on the activities that we're doing over the course of this project. It will be running for 4 years. And during that time, I think we have many more opportunities for engagement, including having a session on the 30th and 31st of March, where colleagues can really get in touch with the details of the CAAP project. For now, though, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for your time and for your wonderful inputs and questions. Thank you so much, Prabhat. Over to you.
Thanks, Thando. Apologies for the technical glitches. Thank you very much, Melissa. Thank you very much, Melisizwe and Mduduzi for your inputs. I think I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot from your intervention. And I'm really looking forward to building momentum and shifting the conversations towards implementation and accountability, and not just talking about the next promise. And I think that applies not just to South African landscape, but internationally also. So I'm really looking forward to the next webinar also, because it will raise these questions. And we are looking forward to ideas. If you have any, please do reach out to the project team. Pato, if you can share the project, I see you have already shared some links in the chat. Yeah, looking forward to having a lot of you in the next webinar, and have a good day ahead.